Main issue in my view is that it really requires a fundamental transition of a lot of different systems, including at the societal level. It seems at the moment that the ecological transition is still perceived as an option, like, well, we can do it. Maybe we agree if it's not too inconvenient. While I think this is not the case, it requires some radical transformations of our society. And I think the biggest issue at the moment is to get everybody on board with this. The role of my field, so this is the psychology of sustainable development, is to really look at the human factor of the required transition. So this means looking at factors such as perception. So how do people perceive the situation? Do they see the urgency? What are potential barriers that keep them from seeing the situation? What are maybe defense mechanisms that we do not want to admit that it's so bad because it would be too big of a cut in our living standards? We also look at potential mechanisms that we can use to drive people to action. How can we motivate them? What are the different motivational systems that we can use? So it's all about human behavior. It's super important to organize workshops like that because, I mean, as I said before, it really requires a fundamental transition. So everybody needs to change. So we also need to bring together people from a lot of different disciplines and give them the toolkit that they can use to implement this change. So it's super important to put together workshops like that. And it's also very nice to see how this workshop is growing and developing. So great job so far.
The problem is adapting to change and accepting that we will have to adapt our behavior and make and work out how we can adjust our quality of life to ensure that we reach the carbon net zero by 2050. I think there's several components. One is I've been trained as an economist, and so an economist basically is all about weighing up options and deciding what is the best option. And the way you decide that is through net benefit analysis. And I think that's what we have to do is sort of measure the impact of our decisions. But secondly, so that we do not come across as bureaucrats and out of touch with people, we need to be able to tell stories that capture the imagination and basically facilitate the transition. And that's what's a good thing about change management. The basis of change management has often come through the organizational change model, which is often based on using biblical stories and biblical narratives to facilitate and talk about change, because they realized that the communities that came from churches, the communities that came from community organizations were the ones that basically inspired change. And we often look at David and Goliath as the story that so many people tell about against all odds, we overcame and we delivered something. And in a way, that's the story of climate change. Well, I think fundamentally, most of the students doing the workshop come from an academic background. And what they really need to begin to understand is, how do I adapt my emotions, my feelings to actually believe that I can achieve and do something? Because often when you're in large institutions, you only see yourself as a cog in the wheel. And so my aim in my course is to basically give students three approaches to how they can facilitate change in climate change. One is looking at an organizational change model. The second one is looking at using management systems within organizations to facilitate change. And the third is trying to look at a startup model for change, basically trying to create some form of social impact business that rather than being dependent on philanthropy, basically becomes a business in itself, earns revenue, and in the process generates change.
Great. Fantastic. You see,
All
you are
right.
great.
Well,
I think
thank you.